How could it be that the care that we give to another is greater than that which we give ourselves? In the film The Whale, with Brendan Fraser, he gives his magnus opus acting performance, the best of his career. This film is about love and a very profound lesson in we do not need to see ourselves in a favorable way to give love. We have a story here where the father is trying to repair a brokenness with his daughter. He has blamed himself for so many things that have gone wrong. His divorce, the loss of a partner, and the breakup of his relationship with his daughter. And for those instances, the interpretation and the meaning that he adds to these instances and the blame that he puts on himself causes him to eat himself to death. But while doing so, all he can do is to see the light in others as a teacher, and most importantly to his daughter. And what's fascinating is that we often say to ourselves that to love another we must love ourselves. And that, whatever that belief is, was not believable according to this film. That he doesn't love himself at all. He hates himself. And yet has tremendous love and wants to create a better relationship out of that love for his daughter because he sees light in her and sees potential and she doesn't. And so the wisdom in this is to see and be seen. That oftentimes to be seen, when we do not see ourselves, we see what is in the other. And the truism is, we will never ever see our own face. You, me. The only way we can see our face is through the reciprocity of relationship. You'll see a two-dimensional image of your face. You can't see your face in reading a book. You can't see your face in listening to a tape. But you can see your face by having another look at you, receive you. And so we often judge people by their behavior, but rarely do we really understand their experience. And in seeing another, one thing we can do is to layer more into their experience. And what that suggests is that we can radically shift our attention from where we want others to be, or where we expect them to be in our judgment, to where they actually are in their experience. The truth is, you can never manage another person's experience. Their experience is their own. And that being said, we can't necessarily take that from them. In fact, you will never ever understand the experience fully of another, and no one will ever understand your experience. And part of that is that we each have a rich inner life where the other has no idea what anyone's really thinking. No one really knows what anyone is really doing. That's a fundamental cornerstone that we all face in navigating relationships in our life. And so as you look at this material that I'm bringing up, as you look at the teachings and bend the beam to yourself, just take into heart how you would direct yourself, how you would direct your life in the domain of your relationships by virtue of seeing where another is as a fundamental creative force in creating the relationships and deepening the intimacy. Now let's talk about intimacy. The word intimacy means into me see. So into me see would suggest transparency, clarity. And in bringing forth that transparency, obviously there is vulnerability. There's a stripping away of something that is blocking the ability to be seen. And I think at some level, all of us, we have constructs in our mind about what we want people to see versus what they do see. Unfortunately, we can't control anyone's perceptions as to what they select to see because each of us has a filter that's added to our vision. Not everyone can see without dirt on the window. We all have mental models about what we expect to see or what we're already familiar with, as if we lay that over and onto the thing that we look through in the window. And so, can we truly be seen? Well, we can probably be seen. But there is much to say about what is able to be seen. So therefore, considering that we may not be seen, the way that we maybe want to be seen, we continue to put forth an image of ourself in the way that we want to have other people hold us versus the way we see we are. And this is the heart of the ego, is that we have that image of ourselves or belief or the concepts about who we are, and based on our believability in those, it would suggest that we therefore need to make a strategy, and that strategy is to put out some sense of a false self. Social media doesn't help this, because what it asks us to do is to select the parts of ourselves, edit ourselves in such a way where we get to paint the picture and propagandize how we are wanting to be seen versus the inside reality of our lives. And I think at some level we all monitor and surveillance the inside reality of our lives, and we have a way of editorializing or editing our disclosures. That we are disturbed by certain truths that are in fact living and very alive and true, and yet the level of shame that we have in the sense that it would not make us lovable or it would not make us acceptable, we would not belong if we were to be seen, would suggest rejection. Now, where this is interesting is that I cannot control anyone's rejection. That anyone at any time has the opportunity of refusal. I mean, any leader in a company that's positioning a vision or being themselves and asking people to be led by them has the opportunity of being refused. We all face the truth of being refused. And yet we want to in some way diffuse it, bypass it, backdoor it, work around it because we take the refusal personally. We think that when other people do not want to follow us, don't want what we have, don't want us in their lives, that something's wrong with us. And therefore, our typical realm to look is self-examination. So what is it that's going on in me, or what is broken in me that is giving rise to what is really going on? And the first sort of default is, well, I've got to look at myself. I need to look at myself. I need to look at myself. I need to study myself. What have I done? I'm responsible for everything going on in my life. You're not responsible for everything going on in your life. If that was so, you wouldn't be living in your life. You would just be constantly looking at yourself as a way that you've really done it on yourself. Or you've kind of betrayed yourself or inflicted this on yourself. And I don't know if you're all that powerful. That means that there would be no objective reality and that you wouldn't have an opportunity to be fluent in reality because your identity is so stuck to it. And once we take our identity away, we use our awareness to regulate that identity, to set that aside, put that in the bleachers and say, whatever data points I'm getting, whatever the current reality is, good, bad, and ugly, can I meet where it is? Even the fear and the standards by which we need to live and those things, when we're not living up to those standards and we say I'm powerless because I'm not meeting my own expectations, even knowing our core material, that material does not define us as people. The emotional material from our families, those relationships that maybe when our growing up, those that insulted us at some level had some level of influence. But we can also re-look at how we were responsive to those moments. And at times when we didn't really have much to think about or we hadn't really considered what was going on, our default pattern was, it must be about me. The way I feel so badly, therefore I'm going to make a conclusion. That conclusion becomes a never again. I gave myself instructions. I won't let myself get hurt this way, therefore. So I'm going to compose a self. I'm going to try to live in the world in a way that blocks my preemptive predictions. So really what I'm doing is I'm afraid of and I'm avoiding something that I don't want to repeat itself. And by doing so, I'm going to need to modify myself or in some way put myself in positions where I don't have this experience. And this is fear. Now the alternative is, the opposite of that is something more generative, is if I spend all my time worrying about what other people think and worrying about what other people are doing and thinking about me, what if they're actually thinking about what I think about them? Wouldn't that be a cosmic joke? That we're both thinking about what we want each other to think of each other. So it's like two video projectors that are projecting on each other and they're trying to manipulate one another's perceptions. This is crazy, right? I mean, you hear the sound of that. How could that be so? But that's often the truth of our experience. that we're so busy trying to be somebody or impress one another or let the other see what we want them to see that we do not have full transparency. We don't show up as a whole person. And this is confining our own freedom, our freedom to be authentic, our freedom to be ourselves, our freedom to only bring out the best. Don't bring the thorns on the rose bush, please. Only the right smelly roses. I really want the good stuff, the right perfume. And so I'm only letting people smell my good side. And we hide the bad side to be able to offset the shame or to be able to belong or to let go of the fear of humiliation to deal with these very real, what we make real, concepts about ourselves. So here's a very radical question. What if creating the relationships that we want has nothing to do with our opinion of ourselves? In the film The Whale, I found that to be assertively true. That this person had no good opinion of himself, and all he could do was to love and generatively create the relationship or recreate the relationship he wanted with his daughter. And that process was a process of learning, discovering, experiments, getting it wrong, getting it right. But what fed Charlie, what fed the character, was this vision of what he wanted for his daughter, the higher hopes that he had for his daughter, to see herself and to come back to loving a part of herself or realizing a talent that she had. And what that did, as a result of putting himself into that place to be, or that place to create, was it was very transformative. And the new responses that he could bring forth, the loving father or the compassion, those behaviors were driven by the structure of what he wanted to create, in contrast to what he saw in the current state. She was very cynical. She had a lot of emotional wounding. She was under the spell of a lot of hateful feelings and a lot of feeling abandoned by a father who did, in fact, abandon her. And yet, her core material was in the moment of being shaped. At a teenage year, she was at a critical point. So he's intervening at this stage in his life because he chooses to. Is he in a good position to do so? No. Has he brought himself to a place where he's handicapped himself? Yeah. But that wasn't really where the focus was. It wasn't on solving the problem or trying to self-improve or to help himself. It was more about how he could help her see herself. And it wasn't a prerequisite for him to fix himself to do that. I think it just speaks so well to the creative process in what's really true to the sake of the creative process. And that the creative process isn't about self-improvement. Self-improvement, in Charlie's case, was an act of violence. He was so far into his underlying motivation to chastise himself, he was so captive to his underlying beliefs that truly his beliefs were that, but they were irrelevant to creating a different relationship with his daughter. And I just find that fascinating that it came to mind for a book writer, a director, to put that out there and to shape such a powerful message for a sense of what's possible with creating outside a person's opinion of themselves. And that it is possible to create a different future or create an alternative and bring that into being by building capacity to do so from wherever we are. So creating is not situational. And therefore we focus on creations rather than ourselves. And when we do so, we realize that we're a creator in it and that we're focused on the process, not ourselves. And I thought this was just such an important piece to bring up. And if you do watch the film, which I hope you do, that you realize this dimensionality of it and that you bend the beam to yourself a little bit in referencing maybe how true this is for setting forth the creative act in your life and what it is you want to bring into being in the relationships that matter to you. And that the work doesn't start with yourself. The work starts with creating. It starts with understanding what currently is going on relative to what you want to create and building a capacity toward that which you want to create, which will ultimately come into being or not. There's no guarantees. But that the creative act is born out of loving something so that we create it. And the concern and care is the driving force, the dynamic urge behind that which we create. And that love that we have for the outcome is a force that does not need compromise. It's a force that's true. And that just because it's difficult does not corrupt the actual motivation to go the distance. You know, as hard this was for Charlie, he really pulled it together because his vision was not compromised. Despite his opinion of himself, despite how hard it wasn't a problem to solve. It was a generative architecture. It was an outcome that he chose to create. And it made all the difference. And as current reality became the vision, part of that was realized in his daughter's sense to be able to see herself and be able to see where her face was through her father's eyes and to become whole. And that was enabled through Charlie's efforts to create the relationship. And that transcendence, I think, was what was so moving in this movie. And so at first I was a little adverse to seeing it because I thought, would I ever want to be someone like him? Of course not. There's so much sadness in seeing where a person can take themselves and how they destroy themselves, and yet at the same moment be able to move and influence and to create really beautiful things despite those kind of instances. I think it's an extreme, but in this case, the creating is the creating, and the creative act is still there. It prevails, it precipitates, no matter who we think we are. And that's such a beautiful, beautiful truism that right now you can set forth to create because the future is up for grabs. And that the only limitation to that is your conceptual set points. But what you choose, what you desire, what you want is what you want. And you choose it because you want it. That's a creative act. And it starts with that. What do you want to create?